RAR 23 The Revenge is brought to you by the 6th Whenever the Hell Reviewing Contest! Hey kids, do you want to win Ace's cat? Well, next week you'll get a chance to do it! Start those reviewing engines because Ace is about ready to plunge into hell again! And you can win a cap! Next week! Reviewing Contest! Balls? Oh yeah, we're still on this joker.
Balls for the Sega Genesis is a piece of shit.
None of the points you presented stuck, Kenny. I'm still not convinced that Balls is a terrible game from watching your review. I'd say anybody who is extremely easy to convince.
But we're not done yet. There's also a Balls game for the Super Nintendo. Yep. Might as well play it while we're on the subject.
Gee, you look so dejected. What's on your mind, Kenny?
What the fuck am I doing? I'm 30 years old and I still never saw a pussy of my wife. There's a job at McDonald's I should apply for. Fuck my life.
Yep.
So, here we go. Balls and the Super Nintendo. Nothing much has really changed. You still get the same drug-induced bullshit from the Sega Genesis version.
Ah, drugs. The lazy go-to analogy for the witless. Seriously, whenever someone says blank is like blank on drugs, it's because they're not smart enough to come up with a creative analogy. Now, if the Genesis version and the SNES version are the same, why bother comparing the two except to make more Balls jokes? Oh.
The title screen has changed though, and it definitely looks better than its Genesis counterpart. You get the same characters as before, they still sound like complete jackasses.
Oh, do they, Kenny?
The battle screen is a bit better. I like the background a lot more than the stadium, and there's a time limit at the top too.
Thanks for pointing out the apparent.
The floor still moves, but it's nowhere near as bad as the Genesis version. One thing that's really annoying is the fact that there's text right behind you, which I find a bit distracting. I've got to admit though, I find it funny that the game actually censors itself. No joke. Fuck! This asshole is sitting on top of me and juggling. What a cocky bastard.
Gee, it's a shame you can't follow the example the game set for you.
Yeah, pun definitely intended.
Wait, there was a pun in there? Rewind it.
Fuck! This asshole is sitting on top of me and juggling. What a cocky bastard. Yeah, pun definitely intended.
Do you even know what a pun is?
Oh, balls! I mean, fuck! I died by that!
Yeesh, now you're just trying way too hard. Your review would have been infinitely better had you just said balls over and over again while the game footage played. Balls, 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 ballsity, balls, balls, balls. Balls. See, there, I wrote a better review than you.
Well, that's enough of those games, fucking balls. You give testicles a bad name. Why don't you go back to your neighbor, the asshole? Get it? Balls, neighbor, asshole.
I like how he looks down in shame after delivering that terrible line. It's almost like he knows that he just said the most unfunny, contrived joke ever.
Ugh, somebody call 911, because I was robbed.
Boars, you're off the hook.
Okay, so let's see what other games the Sega Genesis has to offer, shall we? Never heard of this one. Let's give it a shot, shall we?
And this concludes the NC-17 revisit. Well, only one more to go, thank God. Good night, Kenny. Enjoy your obscurity. Navigator. This worthless group of inconsequential reviewers gained the ire of many a YouTuber with their contrarian reviews. If Chris Bors is the father of uninformative, pointless reviews, George Wood is definitely the grandfather. So some shitty public access show called Flights of Fantasy moved their archive to YouTube, and among their greatest hits is their infamous FF7 review, which my viewers cited as the one they most wanted to see ripped apart. And now for the disclaimer. Time for a little story. Many of my viewers know that I'm friends and even make videos occasionally with Razor Fist. Want to know how we met? The story is pretty funny, actually. One of my fans a long time ago asked me to do an RAR on him, and they cited, and this is a big one here, his Final Fantasy VII review as the reason I should rip into him. Well, here's the kicker. I watched that review and agreed wholeheartedly with it. Then I found that the guy lived in Phoenix, and I decided to introduce myself to him, and the rest, as they say, is history. Yes, I agreed with his review. Now let me tell you about my experience with Final Fantasy VII fanboys. Back in 1997, I bought this one right on release date because I was a huge fan of the Final Fantasy series, particularly of Final Fantasy VI, and this was a time when I was looking for new RPGs to play, since Nintendo at the time made the butt-headed decision to alienate a lot of gamers with their N64 releases. If RPGs are what you like to play, then you're shit out of luck. I switched to Sony the first chance I got once I saw things like Wild Arms and Suikoden being released exclusively on the PlayStation and the like. But I digress. Like many, I enjoyed Final Fantasy VII. It was just the kind of thing I wanted. Times were good. So why did I agree with Razorfist's review? Well, 3 words. Final Fantasy VIII. You see, I could never put into words what exactly happened that radically changed my mind about Final Fantasy as a whole after I played and hated 8. I just thought that they stopped making Final Fantasies for me, and were now aiming for a newer, dumber, as Razorfist put it, cosplaying Ramune swilling Pocky chomping dipshit crowd. I could never put my finger on exactly what went wrong. I simply blamed Final Fantasy VIII for the downfall of the series and left it at that. But the years went by, and throughout many a conversation with fanboys of the series, I slowly began to loathe Final Fantasy VII as well. Sure, the Sephiroth fanboys, the idiots who'd refuse to play the older, better games in the series and who'd call it the best in the series regardless. The fact that I virtually couldn't talk about Final Fantasy anywhere without reading their idiotic, poorly spelled love poems to that emo fuckhead Cloud. It's hard to keep liking a game when you refuse to be identified alongside the growing number of blithering idiots who became the stereotypical fan of the series in the long run. And then Razorfist said this to put it into perspective.
And that brings me to perhaps the worst mark against this absolute travesty of a video game. It's most people's first RPG! Which doesn't sound so bad at first, right? Oh well, some people were just late to the party. But here's a question. If so many people's introduction to the entire RPG genre was this leather belt buckle and zipper-drenched compensatory sword-wielding emo laughingstock, what do you suppose these people would then expect from the RPG genre as a whole from that point forward? And they sure as shit got it.
Holy shit! Final Fantasy VII was the reason it all went to hell. Well, I rubbed the sand from my eyes and I gave the game a final replay in 2010. Just months before I'd have to sell my entire collection off. Did I enjoy the game? You bet I enjoyed it!
But I did have to stop and laugh retrospectively at every hint of things to come for the Final Fantasy series as a whole. Hints I'd failed to see in the past. For Final Fantasy VII was the real beginning of the end, not Final Fantasy VIII like I'd originally pondered. Do I hate the game? Absolutely not! I hate the fanboys, who eventually outnumbered and outvoted us original fans of the series, who killed it with their questionable taste. Nowadays, Final Fantasy is a pathetic joke. Long gone are the days when you would slay the 4 fiends and save the world with your trusty sword. Now you get to sit through a boring movie starring Mr. Emo McQueerpants alongside a cast of yawn-worthy sissies whose only personality trait is angst. Thank you, Cloud and Sephiroth. You single-handedly destroyed the modern RPG, perhaps irrevocably. I didn't know it at the time, but you killed Final Fantasy as we knew it by sowing the seeds of angst and runny mascara. I hope you're happy. So long, Shadow. Hello, vapid can-can girl who clearly isn't dressed for stealth. Goodbye, Cecil. Oh, hi there, blonde Aladdin. Ready to pick some flowers? I know I am! So this is for you, fanboys. Impartiality with the rose-colored glasses taken off. Navigator's Final Fantasy VII Review. Okay, yeah, we know about the anachronistic song.
Square certainly had to make some sacrifices to make Final Fantasy VII a reality. With so much marketing money being pumped into the project, the pressure is on for Square, and more so for Sony, who is publishing Square's work. While this is clearly the best role-playing game ever made,
Ugh, what more do you people want? They agreed with you!
it does not provide anything new in terms of game design. The way in which you go about accomplishing tasks has not changed. You still have to talk to countless villagers and countrymen to advance your quest. On top of that, the text is boring. So boring you may fall asleep. We are such fans of the Final Fantasy series that it pains us to go on, but the flaws keep mounting. The control of your character, which is often too small on the screen, is downright awkward due to the frequent isometric angle of the environment. The enemies take too long to defeat because the game has turn-based battles, a staple in role-playing games despite their unrealistic nature. Plus, the battles are peppered with fancy camera angles which are neat the first time around, but after that they only serve to lengthen an already slow battle. The music and sound, well, they blow chunks. And for all you parental types out there, chill! There is nothing wrong with regurgitation analogies. A good example of the poor sound is this fire, the sound effect of which is no more advanced than the fires used in previous games. Perhaps most of these complaints are minor, but we expected more from this game. On the plus side, the game is still worth purchasing because it lasts long, and heck, this is Final Fantasy.
Alright, seriously, this was like a love letter to Final Fantasy, folks. They clearly forced themselves to try to find something to nitpick on because they wanted to prove they had some sort of journalistic integrity by presenting as contrarian a view as they could whimper through. If they didn't like the game in the least,
over the course of the next few months, we will keep you posted on the plot developments in the game.
they wouldn't have dedicated the second half of their alleged review to going over the game's plot in detail, as well as promising you plot updates in the future. So what the hell are you complaining about? That they didn't love your favorite game enough? Come on! You want my opinion? I think they were extremely biased, too much in favor of Final Fantasy VII, and they presented a half-assed video that pretends to know what they're talking about without ever once having touched upon any valid complaints. So fanboys, quit your whining. Navigator was kind to you by virtually admitting that your favorite RPG of all time is the best there is. The rest of you who are capable of looking past the rose-colored glasses, I invite you to check out Razorfist's review so you can see what the other side of the coin really looks like. He's harsh, but at least he has valid observations. Navigator has done so much worse than this. I'd do another one of their reviews, but you know what? Navigator is overdone. Consult Retsupre for your anti-Navigator needs.
Me? I've got plenty of new reviewers to choose from. Till next time, dear viewer.